It started like any other day in the small town of San Francisco del Rincon, Mexico. A quiet rural town where people knew each other by name, where neighbors exchanged greetings in the market, and life seemed predictable. But behind the facade of normalcy, a nightmare was unfolding, one that would terrify the entire country. For years, the Gonzalez sisters, Delfina and Maria de Jesus, were considered nothing more than two hard-working women running a business. Their large property, known simply as Rancho El Angel, looked like any other ranch from the outside. It was surrounded by tall walls, with a heavy metal gate that stayed locked at all times. To outsiders, the sisters were just private, perhaps even a bit secretive. But no one could have guessed what those walls were hiding. The Gonzalez sisters had inherited the ranch from their family and decided to turn it into a bar and brothel. At first, it seemed harmless enough, a place for men traveling through town to get a drink and some company. But in reality, Rancho El Angel would soon become a place of unimaginable cruelty. Women from surrounding towns began disappearing. Some were teenagers, some young mothers, all vulnerable and struggling financially. The sisters had a system. They sent men to lure women with promises of jobs as maids, waitresses, or nannies. Once the women arrived at the ranch, they discovered the truth. They weren't employees. They were prisoners. Locked behind iron doors, the women were beaten, starved, and forced into sex work for the profit of the Gonzalez sisters. The sisters controlled everything with an iron fist. Their rules were simple: obey or be punished. Any sign of disobedience was met with unimaginable violence. Many women simply vanished. Their families never heard from them again. Rumors started circulating in town. Families whispered that the sisters were involved in the disappearances, but no one dared confront them. The Gonzalez sisters were powerful. They had connections to the local police, and anyone who crossed them seemed to disappear too. Fear kept the entire community silent. The terror inside Rancho El Angel only grew. The sisters' cruelty escalated with time. If a woman got sick, pregnant, or was no longer useful to them, she was killed. Victims were buried in makeshift graves on the ranch property. Others were dumped into wells like trash. The sisters showed no remorse. To them, the women were just a source of income. One survivor later recalled, "You could hear the screams at night. Women begging for help, praying someone would come. But no one ever did." Years passed, and the number of missing women continued to rise. But the Gonzalez sisters felt untouchable. They flaunted their wealth in town, bought off authorities, and kept their victims under tight control. They believed their secret would stay buried forever. But in 1964, fate intervened. A young woman managed to escape the ranch. She had been lured there months earlier, told she would be working as a maid. Instead, she was locked in a filthy room with other captives and forced into prostitution. She had watched friends die. She knew if she didn't escape soon, she would be next. One night, when a guard got drunk and fell asleep, she slipped through an unlocked door and ran barefoot through the fields until she reached a nearby town. Exhausted and terrified, she told the police everything. What she described was beyond belief. Dozens of women held against their will, tortured and murdered. At first, the authorities hesitated. The sisters had friends in high places, and the idea that two women could be responsible for something so horrific seemed impossible. But the escapees' story was too detailed to ignore. Police decided to investigate. What they found inside Rancho El Angel would haunt them for the rest of their lives. When officers entered Rancho El Angel, they were hit with a stench so overpowering it made them gag. The smell of death. As they moved through the dark, narrow corridors of the ranch, they discovered locked rooms filled with women. some alive, some barely clinging to life. The captives were malnourished, bruised, and too weak to stand. Then came the graves. Behind the main building, police unearthed bodies buried in shallow pits. Some had been there for years. Others were so decomposed they could only be identified by the remnants of their clothing. In wells and hidden corners of the property, more bodies were discovered. The sheer number was staggering. The Gonzalez sisters were arrested immediately. During interrogation, they showed no remorse. In fact, they seemed more concerned about their business being shut down than the lives they had destroyed. The trial revealed the full extent of their crimes. Over the years, the sisters had abducted and killed dozens, possibly hundreds, of women. Witnesses testified about the brutal conditions inside the ranch, how the sisters treated the women like property, discarding them when they were no longer profitable. The courtroom was packed with journalists and grieving families. The escaped survivor, along with others, bravely testified, recounting the horrors they had endured. One survivor said, "Every day you prayed it wasn't your turn. You lived in constant fear. If you got sick, you knew you wouldn't see another sunrise." The sisters were sentenced to decades in prison. Justice, it seemed, had finally been served. But for many families, the pain never went away. To this day, no one knows the exact number of victims. Some estimate it could be more than 90. Others believe the true number is closer to 150. The Gonzalez sisters became infamous throughout Mexico, symbols of greed and cruelty. Rancho El Ángel was eventually torn down, but the land remains a haunting reminder of the evil that once thrived there. And perhaps the most chilling part of this story? If that one young woman hadn't found the courage to escape and speak out, the sisters might have continued their reign of terror for many more years. So, when you think you know someone, when you believe evil can't hide behind an ordinary face, remember the Gonzalez sisters. They were just two women running a business. But behind closed doors, they were monsters. If this story kept you hooked until the end, give it a like and subscribe, because the next story will be even darker.